Thank you for joining Tech Tuesday 22. I used AI to make the drawing, so please excuse spelling mistakes. Now, before we start, I'd like to take 1 minute of silence in respect of the victims of the horrible atrocities that were committed last week and the ongoing hostage situation. It was not easy to prepare Tech Tuesday, so I took a previous presentation and I repurposed it. The issue that I want to talk about is the question that you keep on asking yourself if you have a company and you have an IP budget, and the question is, what IP should you be working on now? Okay, there's all these different possibilities. So developing an IP portfolio takes time, but what do we do now? And why do we do it now? And what can interfere with that? Now, just to give a background story, imagine that you have a new startup company and they invented a disposable bottle cap that when you put it on a bottle filled with water, it turns that water into soda by pressurizing CO2 into the bottle. Imagine that's, the invention. I'm going to focus on patents, but everything I say applies also to other IP categories, like designs and so on. But there are significant differences, and I will not be talking about these differences. In order to talk coherently about this problem, I decided to make two oversimplified models. The first one is a model of companies. So if you have a startup company, it progresses in a certain way, and I'm suggesting you can have a basic technology stage. Then you have an exploration stage where you're looking for that killer app, which will make the company have value. Then you have an optimization stage, what people usually call product market fit. Then you have a growth stage. I mean, if you have product market fit, you pour in the money and the company grows and takes over the entire world. Now, obviously, not all companies look like this, and you can be at two stages and you can go backwards, but as a general framework, I think this one is correct. And I also want to talk about different types of IP. And again, I'm giving an oversimplified model of the different types of IP, but I think it's a very useful model ever since I started using it. The first type of IP is what I call me IP. That's IP that covers what we're doing. The bottle cap, how it generates CO2. Consequences IP is IP that we use to cover the consequences, downstream or the upstream of the invention. Anti-IP is IP directed at your competitors. Transactional IP is IP that is designed to help with transactions. In this case, for example, we would definitely want Pepsi to buy our company or to license the technology. And we're going to have IP directed to that. and other IP is IP which is intended for other types of strategy. And of course, any particular IP item, any particular patent application or trade secret or whatever can and maybe should fall into multiple slots. And in fact, it can fall into different slots at different stages of the company. In other words, what is me IP today might be anti-IP later. And one last formalism. When we write a patent application, there are two interesting dimensions. Dimension number one is, can we create it? Does a patent attorney have enough information to draft a patent application? And value, how much value do we expect that particular piece of IP to have? So if we go back to the example of the cap, which pressurizes with CO2 whatever bottle it's put on, it could be that the client only has a vision and doesn't know how to do it yet. So can we create it? Maybe not. Perhaps the client has two ways of doing it. One is mechanical and one is chemical, and they're planning on going the mechanical route. So we can also write IP for the chemical route, but maybe the expected value for the chemical IP is low because we don't think you can have a good chemical solution. So in this drawing that we have down here is a typical situation where we can draft a patent application now. Patent attorneys usually say, yeah, I can draft a patent, but the expected value is low. A little bit more about CAN. If we want to draft a patent application, there's three important requirements. I mean, others, but it has to be novel. It has to be inventive, and it has to be enabled. And I'm including in that the description requirement and so on. So we can draft an application if we have enablement. And if we can at least, have a feeling for what might be novel, because if we don't have a feeling, it's going to be kind of difficult to point it out in the patent application. And we need to have a feeling for what's inventive in order to make sure we have the groundwork to deal with inventive step arguments. Now, here's something very interesting. As you wait, novelty goes down and enablement goes up. So at the point where you have novelty, inventiveness, and enablement, and I'm just talking about CAN, it's quite common that while you might be ready to draft, some of your secrets have leaked out to your competitors, or other people have published stuff, or heaven forbid your own people publish stuff. Value. So value comes if you know what to say, what your IP will be used for. And that really means that if you don't know what the market, competition, strategy, and alternatives look like, the expected value for the IP is going to be lower. Okay? Because I can have a great invention. I'm going back to my bottle cap. Let's say I know how to make a bottle cap, which is radially expandable, so it works on all different sizes of bottles. And that's a cool technology, and we can definitely write the patent, but maybe the value is low because maybe the best thing to do is to sell different sizes to different people so we can keep track of the money that they're paying us. And just like with CAN, time is very important. When you wait, what gives you value? Your certainty goes up. Information you need to make decisions becomes more available. And also your competition is not blocked. And therefore, and here's the important part, the chances of filing the strategic IP goes down. And therefore, by the time you know what you need to know, it's too late. but also vice versa. We talked about wanting to sell the bottle cap company to PepsiCo. Well, if right now it's difficult for you to contemplate who the strategic is going to be, then the value of IPs that you write in order to tie in that strategic goes down. What I did, and here's where all of this was really just background, is I have 3 charts. And the first one pretends to show what is the truth about the can and value state of each IP component. The second chart shows what is the perceived, when I say perceived, what people typically perceive. When I say people typically perceive, I mean from my experience in meeting clients and so on. And the third one is what is the potential if you're willing to do a little bit of work. In other words, if instead of the patent attorney doing exactly what he's told and what he's given, if the patent attorney gives a little pushback and talks a little bit about adjacent reality, then you can be in a better situation. And you will see that the perception is a big part of the problem. And when you have bad perception, you have fewer resources. So what do? You file patents, and what is the easiest thing to see? And what's easiest to see? Technology. Okay? Now, everything I'm showing you is made up and not tied to any particular example. It's just to give you a feeling. So here's a chart. And even if you don't fill it in, I think the chart is very valuable, because what the chart is doing, it's talking about different stages of the company and what kind of IP you will want at each stage of the company. I think an IP plan has to talk about this in any case. I'll just take 2 examples. The first example is over here. When the company is at the basic tech stage, it is very easy to write me IP. It's more difficult to know that that IP has value, because your company might change what they're doing. When you get to the optimization stage, it's much more difficult to write patents because everything published. But whatever you write probably has a greater value because you know it's tied into some sort of optimal product market fit. And when you get to your scaling stage, it is difficult to write patents on what you're doing because you're scaling, meaning you're doing what you did before. And it's difficult for it to have value because you're scaling what worked. Now, of course, when the company gets to this point, it's already working on version 2.0, which is over here. So the company is simultaneously for version 1.0 at this stage, and for version 2.0 somewhere over here. Anti-IP, okay, IP against your competitors. It's somewhat more difficult to draft than IP on your basic, on your, what you're doing, but the value is higher. If you're the kind of company that wants to have a monopoly, then having IPs that prevent your competitors from having a good product has value, and we can see it from day one. You know, somebody does a due diligence and they say, who are your competitors? Okay, what are you doing about it? You'd love to say, well, I have IP. Transactional IP, since we have no idea what some transactions will look like, it's very difficult to write. And here's how things are perceived. Let's look at the me IP and compare to the anti-IP. The me IP, people believe will have a significant value. The anti-IP, people think is difficult to draft and difficult to to give value to it. And if we look, for example, here at other strategy IP, when you're in the exploration stage, you're automatically developing all sorts of strategies. You're deciding not to follow up on them, but you're developing them. That means we know how to write the patents and they will have value. Unfortunately, the company is so focused on what it wants to do that they perceive IP on other strategies to be off focus and not valuable. And here's what happens if you do some work. In the MeIP, I believe it's possible to capture some of the value that people imagine that you could get, but you have to work in order to get it. If we look, for example, at anti-IP, I think we can more easily and get more value on anti-IP, even at the basic tech stage. And if we look here, for example, at the optimization stage, again, it's easier to write patents than you might otherwise think. And some places, it seems to me like nothing changes. When you're in the scaling stage of an existing product, it is difficult to write good patents on what you're doing. The caveat I want to give is that sometimes you're actually over here and not over here. Okay, you think you're at the scaling stage, but you're still doing the product market fit. If we take our example of the bottle cap, you've already decided that the bottle cap fits on a standard 1.5 liter bottle. And now you're starting to sell it to distributors all over the world, so you think you're over here. But actually, discovering that you need to do different amounts of CO2 for different types of water, tap water, spring water, water from the swimming pool, and so on, means you're actually still at this stage, where the value can be high even if the difficulty is also high. Okay, so the real purpose of this colorful mosaic is to do two things. First of all, it gives you a tool for thinking about what kinds of IP do I need at what stage, and it's at a more higher abstract level. And the second thing is to show the difference between what is, what people think, and what you can do if you put some work into it. I've said before, what a company is not dealing with now is not known to be needed and not assumed to be possible. It's a big problem. Technology is easy to patent, and everybody assumes that you're going to need it. The tricky thing is that need and can are often confused, and they're also taken as actual facts. We must have this feature. How many times have we had a client come in and say, we must have this feature, and 2 years later, he doesn't have that feature. Why don't you have the feature? No, it's no good, it's bad. Okay? And exactly the opposite was can. The client says, this cannot be done. In fact, I've taken a habit that when a client was sitting in the meeting room and they say it can't be done, so I tell them this table cannot accept the words can't. Okay? And the more typical problems is even when management is aware of a need, that something is needed, IP isn't told about it. And if IP isn't told about it, you're going to file whatever you file too late. Some ideas how to make the situation better. Regarding can, you have to actively identify alternative and consequences. If you identify them, then suddenly you can write patents about them. You do strategy work earlier. Now, strategy work would suggest that you know what the value is. But when you do strategy work, the picture of the future becomes clear. When the picture becomes clear, suddenly you can identify things that you can actually write. If you're sitting in the management side, you need to make sure that the IP people find out about things sooner rather than later. And we see it every day. We saw it yesterday. What the IP person thinks that they can file a patent on is usually way beyond what the CEO thinks that you can file a patent on. It's not always the situation, but it's often the case. That's can. What about value? Well, you filed for a reason. So you need to explore. 2 weeks ago, I talked about exploring the invention. Here, when I say explore, I'm talking about explore what could give value. Okay, it's a value-directed exploration. What is the possible consequences? What kind of strategies might you want to do? What will your competitors want to do? And of course, you actually should be taking the value into account. And a lot of people don't take the value of IP into account when they decide if to file IP. Some of them repeat on focusing on, is it patentable? Is it novel? Is it cool? Does it have an important technical effect? Okay, well, we don't care if it has a technical effect if that doesn't add value. Low probability events can give you a lot of value with a low probability, so it balances each other out and you still have significant value. Value comes from business, so the IP has to be coordinated with a business strategy. And last but not least, you got to assume that your competitors are at least reactive, meaning when they see things happening, they're going to react. So some of the value of your IP comes from the way in which you can control the reactions. But in the real world, your competitor might actually be proactive. Okay, and some of the value is not from doing what you want to do, but from preventing your competitor from doing things that they would do just to make trouble for you. In order to make this more complex than necessary, I'm reminding you that if you file a patent application too soon, you can make it difficult for you to get a useful patent later. So I'm definitely not saying file fast, file often, file early. Okay, I'm saying think about it. So here's some particular use case. Okay, we just created our company. We said, bottle caps that fill bottles with CO2. And the way we do it is we have a little pump inside that pumps air, separates out the CO2 and injects it into the bottle. Incredible technology. So we can definitely file a patent for that, but the question is it really that valuable? Will the competitors think that they need to do it? Okay, maybe the company itself will choose a different solution, maybe a chemical solution. Can it be kept secret? Is it difficult to copy without know-how? These things tell you something about how much protection value you get from the patent versus how much negative value you get from publication of the patent. So in general, you need IP on what people will actually copy. So let's call it your in the future disposable. Do you know what the disposable is? I said before, you should be doing your strategy work early, and it should tell you if you're going to be selling a disposable component, for example, then you have to make sure that your patent covers it. So my conclusion from all of this, if you put in some effort, you get more bang for the buck, and you start by actually ignoring the obvious IP to be written, and you continue with proactive attempts to improve your IP prospects, and all of that using a framework which helps you figure out, just imagine, do you know what to say about each one of these rectangles? I don't care what you say. The minute you have what to say about each one of them, you're already one step forward in having, let's call it an IP strategy, or at least an IP plan moving forward. Okay, so just to give you an example for what a test case might look like, before that I talked about bottle cap. Your client invented an animated chocolate frog, and the internal mechanism is edible. There's no magic involved, no Harry Potter. The frog is still at the design stage. Okay, so now you have to ask yourself, where in this matrix is there a big gap between what people think about IP and what IP actually is? Because that's where you, as a, let's call it IP manager, IP advisor, need to put your effort. Where there's no gap, you just got to do your work. But where there is a gap, you have to try to fill it in. And just to give you a feeling for what a gap might look like, look at the last question. Do you plan on stopping a competitor from selling every flavor beans to Mars Inc.? Okay, those who don't know, every flavor beans on the Harry Potter world, just like the chocolate frog. And they have lots of flavors, some of them disgusting, like snot, some of them incredible. And is it your business? Is it not your business? Do you have an IP opinion about the matter? So if we go back to this story, let's talk here about transactional IP. If I'm trying to sell chocolate frogs, the answer is no. But if one of the ways that I'm going to grow is I'm going to expand into other Harry Potter magical candy, then I need IP over here. And it's really difficult to write it over here, so I should write it over here early on. Okay, that's what I had today, and I am stopping the recording.